Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Siletti, and this is What's Going On. And thank you again to welcoming to the show, everyone. My name is Daniel Siletti, and I got to tell you, we got a big one for you today because it is so cool. I have two people here who are not only television personalities, but they are also big handyman guys. I have Mr. John Weisbarth and Mr. Zack Giffin from Tiny House Nation and from the Tiny House world of building. So, guys, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having us, Daniel.
Yeah, we're happy to be here.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny how we got to do this because we were all brought together, oddly enough, by the wonders of my mother, because you guys did a couple cameo messages for me for my graduation. So thank you again for doing that. That was so awesome for you guys to do.
Hey, what's happening, Daniel? This is Zack Giffin out here on the road. We've got the tiny house behind me. Anyways, I hear a little rumor that you might be graduating from journalism school, and that is a major accomplishment. So congratulations, and thanks for being a fan. And good luck on your journey if you go tiny or wherever this world takes you. Just have fun while you're doing it. So anyways, appreciate it. And again, I wasn't going to say this, but it was your mom and dad who told me about this. But they love you a lot, and they're really proud. Bye.
Daniel, what's up? It's John from Tiny House Nation. First things first, congratulations. Word has it you're a college graduate now. That's the good news. Bad news is now you got to get a job. But back to the good news. Apparently you're a journalism major. I love it. It's a fun field to be in. Now, I did not major in journalism. I was a communications major at UCSB. We didn't have a journalism department. But I did do all that fun stuff like college radio and whatnot. So if you want to get into journalism and are going to be the host that your mom and dad say that you can be, I'm sure you're fully prepared for, eating a lot of rice and beans and like burritos. You're not going to make a lot of money at first, but you're going to have so much more fun than everybody else. And if you mix a tiny house into it, then your expenses aren't going to be that much. So basically, I just wanted to say congratulations on getting your degree. That is no small feat. You'll be well prepared in the world of work. And don't give up. If journalism is something you really want to do, lots of people say they want to do it, but this business has a way of weeding people out in the beginning. So just stick with it. Even if it feels like a slug at times, it'll improve, and it's so much fun. So congratulations, and maybe I'll see you around someday. Bye.
So I guess we'll go to you first, Mr. Giffin. So you are a tiny house builder. You are the man who builds these things. I've seen you on TV before, and we'll get to that part. But we'll start with you with this question. What got you into tiny houses?
I was into tiny houses because I was living in a way where I was trying to minimize my overhead expenses. I had kind of explored a lot of other kind of low-cost living options and had experienced a lot of kind of the indignities that come along with a lot of the housing options that we provide to the lowest class spectrum of people in our society. And tiny home came along, and I just saw it as something that held my bullet points of desirability in terms of affordability, but also quality and dignity. And it was that kind of combination. And then also the fact that it was on wheels, to me, was this incredibly just so much opportunity comes with the ability to be portable. And it just really worked for my life.
Absolutely. And Mr. Weisbarth, you're also a handyman as well, and you got into the whole tiny house thing as well. And so how did you start getting into tiny homes?
Well, let's not insult handymen all across the world by calling me a handyman. The truth is, my dad was a handyman, and I worked for him. He had like a property maintenance business, and so I worked for him on and off growing up during the summers, and then for a couple of years after school. So I had a little bit of a familiarity with that, but wouldn't quite call myself a handyman. What I knew is that I could pick up a saw and most likely put it back down and still have all 10 fingers, but it was never a real guarantee. In terms of the tiny house thing, I came to tiny houses and I discovered tiny houses when I got cast on the show. That was my introduction to it. And originally they kind of liked the idea of, here you've got Zack, who had built his own tiny house at this point, was making films about his experience in tiny house. He has really immersed himself in the tiny house world. They wanted that, and they wanted to put someone like myself who was new to it, because as we were making this show, most of the country was new to the idea of tiny homes. I mean, when we used to say tiny homes, people used to say, oh, for like little people? And we're like, no, normal sized people, just homes not as big. I mean, it was that level of education that needed to be done about tiny homes. And so they figured, why don't you bring in some big goof to, not be smart about it, and then Zack could kind of educate me. And that's sort of how it went. But what we figured out really quickly was, it was like a crash course in tiny homes. I became fully immersed in it. So real quickly started to become more and more of an expert, and certainly an advocate of it. So that was kind of my introduction to it.
Okay. And I mean, you mentioned the show. I see the poster of the show actually in your background there.
How did that even get up there? That's so weird. Someone must have put that up when I was asleep. That's strange.
So I mean, but the two of you, this is how I'm sure a lot of people got introduced to you, from that TV show. And this is a question for both of you. How did the show start, and where did you think that this show would be a hit? It was a hit, and people still continue to watch it. What made you get into it?
Zack?
Either one.
Go ahead, Zack. Oh no. He's giving me the frozen.
Well,
I'll start. Oh,
one of us.
Are you there, buddy?
Really had a whole. Oh,
maybe.
Listen, let me take the first part of this, Zack, while you get your internet dialed in. So in terms of how did the show start, and did we think it was going to be a success? Is that essentially the question, Daniel? Well, the show started really because there was, oh gosh, now we totally lost Zack. The show really was designed or came about to help launch a new network that A&E was doing. And that network was called FYI.
Okay.
And so, it was one of 10 shows, I think, that was going to launch, to help launch the network. And it was a cool idea. And, the exact origins of who came up with it are not totally clear, but there was some idea of like, hey, here's an interesting trend that's going on, and this might be something to tap into. In terms of, for me personally, did I think it was going to be a success? Or, that was in 2014 when we started, and here it is 2020, and we're still talking about it, and it's on Netflix. Yeah. I did not think so. And it has nothing to do with the show. It has more to do with television. I had, at that point, I'd been a sportscaster for 10 years, and then for 2 years after that had been trying to find the next show. And the reality of doing a television show is that you kind of never know what's going to hit. And it's so hard to figure out what is going to hit. And so I was just excited to like, oh, great. I'm at least doing a couple of these episodes. If they make the air, who even knows? But it'll be more tape that I can have and take on to the next thing. I was not really optimistic that the show would go. I figured if we could get one season, and Zack, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this, because the first season, and as we've kind of come to learn, the first season of anything, you're feeling it out.
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's not just Zach and I trying to figure it out. It's the production company trying to figure out what is the formula? How are we going to shoot it? What are the logistics of it all? And quite frankly, it was a total mess in that first season. And I was like, oh, well, this is definitely not going to make it. There's no chance this even gets on the air. So I was like, well, let's just enjoy this, like, these 6 months we have or whatever, because this is definitely not going to make it. Luckily, I proved once again to not know anything.
Okay, well, my perspective on it is that, it was a mess the first season, but we did figure out some really critical elements that kind of turned into the foundation of the show. And that really was the dynamic between John and I, our actual great friendship together and our mutual respect for each other. That was something that, it took a while, John. But no, we kind of fell into it pretty quick. And the other piece was just kind of the formula of the show. The way that I really focused on these kind of special project builds, the things in my mind that if I didn't do would never get done, was something that wasn't scripted into the show. It was something we kind of developed naturally through just that being kind of the focus of my passion. And so it was kind of like the only part that I really saw that needed to be really dialed in was the construction of the homes and just how brutally long the builds were taking and how just detached that was from what the producers had expected. That was the problem with our show. Right. The producers had decided that these homes were going to be built in a week because that's just how you do it on TV. Mm-hmm. And they really didn't look into the actual logistical challenge of what that entails. And we had nowhere close to the amount of manpower or resources in order to pull it off. So when we started building homes in 2 weeks, which to us seemed incredibly fast, to the producers, they're just pulling their hair out because they understand that that is not a profitable dynamic, that it's too expensive to create a show like that. So we had to figure out another strategy.
Right.
And we were able to pivot. And Daniel, I want to say this, in hindsight, when I look back and, you asked me in 2020, why was this show successful? Why has it been successful? I do think, to Zach's point, it has a lot to do with just he and I finding each other and finding a real relationship, because that was able to help kind of carry it through. And I always say this, it's a little bit like an arranged marriage, because Zach and I did not know. This is the other question we get a lot. Oh, did you guys know each other? Did you have a business? We didn't. We met in a conference room, a week before the first episode I was on. And so it's like an arranged marriage. We were put together and expected to have chemistry. And luckily, we were, and we did have that. And it has a lot to do, I think, with both of us and how giving we both can be as people. But really, when you look at it, it made a lot of sense to have someone like Zach, who was preaching the tiny house thing, who knew it, who could look at tiny houses as more than just these cute little things and understand and connect the dots and the steps to how this could have a really profound impact. And it's work that he still does to this day whenever he gets a chance. It's why we're here right now. To combine that with someone like myself was of the genuine curiosity, but also someone who's not in that world, who's not coming from, I'm not the choir behind Zach preaching. I'm out there, I'm just ducked my head into the church and was like, oh, well, this guy's interesting. What's this? Maybe I should tell these, hey guys, come over here. And so it turned out to be this really nice dynamic between the two of us of what roles we sort of represented and what population we represented. And then it really worked out great that we happened to be good friends. So that's in hindsight why I think the show worked. Long answer. Sorry.
No. Yeah. And Daniel, let me touch on that real fast, because I think that you can say, oh yeah, Zach and John, they're good friends. They're kind of funny together. Zach is like a good carpenter. I have developed my ability to kind of create these multifunctional sums much better than I did in the very beginning of the show. That practice, 84 episodes, having pushed through that has really helped build my skills in that level. But I don't think that John and I can take credit for the success of the show. The success of the show, to me,
Are you sure?
is so much. Actually, definitely.
You did not get my notes. I sent you notes. It was saying definitely takes credit for the success. Okay, we'll have to talk about this. I'm sure we can just edit this out. But go ahead, Zach. You were saying.
Well, what I was saying is that tiny houses are just part of these huge movements in other areas throughout society in our world right now. They touch into the environmental movement. They are a big part of the conversation in terms of affordable housing, in terms of our homeless crisis. There's even another conversation about just this kind of push in our society to distance ourselves from excessive material consumption. So it's all of these big kind of pushes that are happening in society. We happen to be there at the right time and created a show that was, semi-fun to watch. But it was really the intrigue of all these other major factors that are cueing people into thinking about tiny houses, not just as a cutesy little home, but as potentially a tool for us to address some larger areas of society, the challenges that we're dealing with.
Right. And you mentioned on the show that you actually live in a tiny house yourself.
Well, it's kind of funny because I have not lived in a tiny house for a number of years now. And whatever bio is out there on the website was written in 2014 and never got changed. So there's been a lot of things that I've done since then that aren't included in the bio. But no, I don't live in a tiny house. And there's one very, very specific reason for that. They're illegal.
Really?
If you want to live in a tiny house in our country, you are basically going to be buying what is called a park model. And in order to live in it legally full time, you have to put it in a trailer park. And I got nothing against trailer parks. But the reason that you don't see a massive explosion in people actually buying and living in tiny houses is not because the demand's not there. It's not because people don't appreciate it or they need big houses. It's because we don't actually allow this type of structure, any structure on wheels, to be lived in full time. And the only places we do allow it is in trailer parks, and they force you to remove the axles.
Wow. Okay. See that I didn't know that, and this is really interesting to me because of the show and because of all the interesting stuff that you did on the show and then put in the houses themselves. I was totally inspired, and I said to myself, this is where I want to live someday. I want to live in one of these, because I find it so fascinating. And again, this is to both of you. Do you think that more people will live in these in the future, and do you think it might get passed as legal someday?
So Zach's gonna have a long explanation here, and so let me just jump in before he goes. I'll give you the cliff notes of what he's going to tell you. Yes, I think more people are gonna move into it. Is it going to be legal someday? There are steps that are already happening in that direction, and there are some counties, especially here in California, where I live, where they're making strides like that. The problem is that it's county by county, and so it's tough. And Zach's involved with a number of groups whose focus is to try and make a national thing so that it's like every county doesn't have to do all of the work every single time, right? Kind of set up a framework of like, okay, you can tweak this little part and that little part, but let's make it easier to accomplish. And Zach, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about this. In my opinion, the reason this work is happening now is we hear a whole bunch about the affordable housing crisis. And there are politicians that want to be able to figure out how to address this. And the options they have, as Zach will tell you, are not affordable to build. It's very, very expensive. Affordable housing affordable housing, to build it the way they have it set up right now is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, close to like $400,000 a unit. And people are looking at tiny houses not as the only answer, but as, whoa, wait a second, here's a really cool thing that people seem to be excited about. And you can accomplish, it can accomplish so many other different things than what the traditional, affordable housing, where you stack it all together and put it in one part of town and it costs a lot of money. There are a lot of inherent advantages in the tiny house. The mobility is one of them. The cost of one of them. The desirability is one of them. And so for all of those reasons, that's what's finally having politicians look at it as a viable option, as one of many viable options to address affordable housing. And so because of that, that's why I think the movement is going in a good direction. And Zack has had a lot of work in that, and not just doing the TV work, but doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff, a lot of talking, going to Washington. I mean, speaking to important people about this stuff. And so, Zack, there's your bio. Go ahead.
Listen, I love that. I should have John take all my answers before I actually answer them. It would like speed the process up so much. Anyways, I think the only thing that I would add to that is that, the process of legality has to happen first, because right now there is a big movement of tiny homes. You have, I would say, probably about maybe 90% of people living in tiny homes breaking the law somehow. Are they harming anybody? I would argue no, but they're somehow in violation, and that's a real big issue. What has to happen is, first, there needs to be actual legal openings to allow common sense rules to take place to allow people to live in tiny homes, right? There's these rules that are basically getting adopted in cities like LA was one of the first. Now San Jose, San Diego's looking at it, Humboldt County. So there's just a huge amount of progress in the last couple months on legalization issues that are starting in California. Like John said, it's a city by city thing. It's very hard to do any kind of rules like that statewide. The only way you can do it is like where Oregon passed a rule saying that they're eliminating single family zoning statewide. And they did it based upon citing it as historically racist and prejudiced. So they're saying this is a discrimination issue, right? So they were able to address it as a discrimination human rights issue, and they eliminated it statewide. They're currently in legal battles with a number of different municipalities over that. But basically, without doing something drastic like that, it's got to happen city by city. It is happening. It's happening as a response to affordable housing crisis and homelessness. California is kind of the epicenter, so it's no surprise that this is where they're also developing the most forward progressive zoning policies, and tiny houses is included. Now, after that happens, in order to be affordable, you got to keep in mind these tiny homes, we're still talking about something that's 50 to 100 grand, sometimes even more, for a really nice tiny home. And even though that might be kind of theoretically affordable compared to the $450,000 affordable housing unit, you can get financing for the unit. You can't get financing for the tiny home. And if you do get financing, it's going to be looked at completely different. You're going to get a loan that is basically created for an RV. And so it's a maybe a 7 to 10 year loan. It's got a much higher interest rate. It's got a much higher down payment. And the basic results is that for somebody who is looking to get a house and they want a tiny home, it's actually potentially easier for them to get a loan with a low interest rate and a low monthly payment on something that is $450,000 versus getting a $100,000 tiny home that is essentially offers them the same dignity and living space, only it's on wheels and it's portable and has a bunch of advantages in that capacity. But it's a quarter of the price. However, because of the way the financing situation is set up, it's actually less expensive to get the $450,000 affordable housing unit than it is the $100,000 tiny home. Wow. And that is a big part of what I'm fighting for, is bringing some kind of common sense into the lending practices surrounding tiny homes. And
Zack, let me jump in here. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Well, I wanted to just challenge your statement that it's cheaper for the $400,000 than it is for the $100,000. And what you're saying is for the end user, because you can't get a good, your loan has a higher interest rate and your down payments more. So it's more money out of your pocket up front, essentially.
Yeah.
Or even maybe long-term with the interest rate. I don't know.
And this is actually, I was using the $450,000 number. What I was kind of saying is it's easier for somebody to get into one of those homes, right?
Yeah.
It's easier for a bank to work with them on a loan for $450,000, even though for most of these people, their income is nowhere close to being able to qualify for a loan of that much, right? But because of the system, because of how we set up the loan requirements and eliminate some loan options on tiny homes, it's actually easier and less of a monthly expense to go for the larger home. And this is a big problem, because if we could get tiny homes to have mortgages the same way that you would on a home on a foundation, our monthly payment, you'd be looking at for a $100,000 tiny home, the way that things are right now, with a 20% down payment, you're talking about $500 a month, right? So there's nowhere can you buy a structure and have some kind of like dignity of ownership and pay $500 a month. That would be in line with what somebody could actually afford given the wages that we are actually paying in this country. And so that's why it's such a powerful tool that can really help just get society to rearrange our housing stock so it's back in line with the needs of the population.
So it's
Daniel, you have the same look right now, Daniel, that I often have when I'm with Zach. You're like a little bit of like your head, your ears are ringing, but also like, whoa. And this is what I was talking about when Zach can look at this and can connect dots, and all of a sudden you're way, way past cute little doilies in a tiny house, right? And that's, I think the cute doilies in the tiny house were an important part of our show. I mean, when you talked about watching the show and be like, oh, this is what I want, that was by design, right? We didn't talk about any of this other stuff. That was never going to be the focus of our show. There just wasn't enough time. That's a great, C-SPAN talk that Zach just gave. But to introduce, this thing, it was kind of like, we kind of trick people, right? We're like, oh, look how cool this is. Everyone likes it. And now have an audience and an opportunity to be like, here's the real meat of it. And so that's essentially what's happening. We just tricked you, is what I'm saying. You thought we were going to talk doilies. Now we just talked affordable housing and loan practices. I mean, just wait. We're only just begun.
Well, now I'm disappointed, because I don't really know if I want to do the tiny house thing or not. I don't know anymore.
Well, that's exactly what it's that. The problem with not talking about it on our show, the problem with just going ahead and having this kind of gorilla in the room, which is that they're not really legal except for in a trailer park, and nobody's dream is to get in a tiny house and live in a trailer park. The problem is that people get really excited, they get passionate about it, and then they feel betrayed when they learn that actually in my space, it's not allowed.
Yeah.
And then they almost kind of get really down on the whole movement instead of recognizing that what it is working towards actual legal allowances for this type of structure and demanding it and making it happen the way that we have in California. So that's a part of it, is that like people end up, by not being honest about it, people end up being deflated, just like kind of how you are right there.
Right. I mean, hey, my mom lived in California for a while, way back, so I may have to come there to you guys. I don't know. But I still find the whole movement just utterly fascinating, and it's because of your show that I think a lot of people like myself will someday find themselves living in these things, and hopefully get the whole process greenlit and have it be a part of life. I'll say like my last couple questions here. What are you guys working on any projects right now? Like tiny homes themselves, other shows. What are you guys working on right now?
Right now, I'm working on not getting COVID-19.
True. Hope you guys are both safe and healthy.
Yeah,
I
we
would
are.
say, John, before John says something super depressing, like, we don't, I'm going to basically jump in there and say what we're doing is we're working really hard to get tiny houses to become a legitimate part of the housing spectrum, right? And a legitimate option, and to break down on the stigmas that kind of are preventing this. And I think that we're gaining a lot of traction in that. And I believe that the next step to kind of the activism and the advocacy that John and I are a part of is trying to show just greater society that what we do in tiny houses and like the kind of construction mentality and the way that they're kind of focused of the quality over quantity, this same type of process is just as beneficial in any size home or in any small space or any place where people feel like, man, I would like to use my space better. And so I think that is, for John and I think that's our next direction. And I would just love an opportunity to kind of have another show that's all about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things that Zack had sort of drilled into my mind over the years, the idea that a tiny home is a lot less about the actual square footage and more about how it's designed. Essentially, an efficient home is a tiny home. So if you have an efficiency of space, if you're maximizing the space in your home, then that's a tiny home. Even if it's 1,000 square feet or 1,100, you know what I mean? If you're packed in there, if you got a family of 5 or whatever, it's this idea of using your home efficiently and the resources that are poured into it and that are consumed by it. And that is what I like to think of when I think of a tiny home. So I was going to say exactly that, Zach. I can't believe you thought I was going to say something depressing. I do want to add this, though. Hold on. Stop the presses, okay? I am working on a show right now, very hard, and it's a Daniel, how old are you?
I'm 22, just turned 22.
Perfect. Good. Listen, the show is for you. The show is called COVID Cocktails, and it's on YouTube. I shoot it in my kitchen on a GoPro, just me and Lock Off Larry, the camera guy, on the stand. And they're like, 6 to 10 minute long, me just making a cocktail. So yeah, happy hour. They come out every Friday on YouTube, youtube.com/C/John Weisbarth. So just search John Weisbarth on YouTube, and you can see I totally was not going to say that. I'm so glad I remembered. I've got my own YouTube show, Daniel. You're not the only YouTube star in the room, is all I'm saying. I
wasn't saying I was. Honestly, I've been keeping busy myself because along with doing this and, I had the whole graduation thing to do earlier on. This, and then I'm also I'm making my own little tiny movies. I'm doing something called Quarantined with Cartoons. I put like cartoons in the house and I interact with them. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, I love it. Daniel, here, hold on, Daniel. Can I just for the fun of it? Oh, can I share my screen real quick?
Sure. By all means.
But it says host disabled attendees screen sharing. Great.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's good to know. So this is season 1 of the cocktail show, and it's just me making cocktails. Season 2, which is coming up very quickly, is going to be me making a cocktail with someone like, say, Zach, and then us. We make the cocktail, and then we just have a little chat, not unlike this, and talk about whatever. So, by the way, Zach, I already booked you on the show. I'll give you the details whenever that's
old fashioned. You got to sign me up for old fashioned.
You're gonna. Yeah, I already made an old fashioned. I was actually thinking, because you also like the dirty martini with gin, a gin dirty martini, or Fernet and cola. Because I already made the old fashioned, which is like Zach and I think, but Zach has these other like weird drinks that he likes. Okay, well, I was going to share the screen, but it's not working. Doesn't matter. Yep. COVID Cocktails, John Weisbarth on YouTube. There you go.
It's super fun. It's a great way to get your Weisbarth fix. I don't have anything like real cool like that in terms of like, I'm performing or anything like that. But I do have a way cool project that I'm part of right now, and we haven't really announced it yet. So this is a little pre-announcement, and it's something called the Microhousing Junior World Championships. And it's a contest that we're putting on with the American Tiny House Association. I'm linking up with a couple other corporations. I'm not going to announce it right now, but it's basically going to be the world's premier design contest for tiny homes in the world, right? And it's going to be an annual thing, and it's all about trying to encourage kids that are interested in design and like tiny houses to engage their mentality and their thoughts into kind of coming up with some solutions for challenges for humanity, and also just trying to encourage kids to get to refine some of their skills and hopefully come away with some knowledge that's going to help them later in life become the boss and not the assistant. And it's just a way cool thing.
God, thank goodness I did mine first.
It's so cool, actually. I love it. And getting the kids into it is exactly what the movement needs to get moving.
Unless it's a cocktail show, then we don't want the kids involved. That's all. I was like, I'm so glad I did the cocktail show first, because if I had to follow, Zach's like, oh, well, actually, I'm doing real work, John. I'm glad you're having fun in your kitchen. I'm like, whoo, dodged a bullet there.
Well,
sorry, Zach, you were going to say something.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, you should do like a under 21 version with like the Shirley Temple and all the other kind of like virgin cocktails, as I think that they call.
Yeah, that's what my mom wants to. She doesn't drink. She's like, can you make me a mocktail? I'm like, no, I'll see. I think it's just a glass of milk here. That's.
Well, I'm getting the alert here from our lovely Zoom producers that we're running out of time. But there's one thing I always do at the end of every talk show, and like I said, I'm a movie maker and I love movies and entertainment. And so with my love for that, there's also a columnist out there I've seen who does this recurring thing called "I Hate These People." And I want to turn it on its head. So it's time for another edition of I Kind of Like These People. And so the people I kind of like are the people that take this pandemic that's going on and they make the best out of it. There is a show out there that I have not seen too much of, but my parents love it, called The Blacklist. And they did an episode, they had to stop in the middle of filming and come back, and they did this animated version, and they just recorded their voices for the animation and spliced in the animated parts of the live action. That's making the best out of something that's not so good going on. And I just wanted to get your guys' opinion. Do you think that was a good move for them or not?
So let me make sure I understand this. What you're saying is The Blacklist, which I actually haven't seen either. I'm familiar with it. They're in the middle of production. They're maybe 3/4 of the way through. Pandemic hits. They have to stop. Well, they still have. So they have some scenes that they've shot and others they haven't. So they just animated the ones they hadn't and voiced that, and then spliced the real and the animated together.
Exactly.
I love that. I have to disagree about kind of liking that, because I love that. What an awesome idea. I love that creativity.
There was something a little bit like that where, every once in a while, John and I will get hired for like commercials or something, and it's always like the best pay that we ever have gotten in our lives. So it's like the actual reward, like the payoff from actually having done all the work for the TV. And I had this job that was lined up that got canceled because of COVID. And this was me going to be flying to LA, and then it was going to be a union set. So it's like crazy how many people they have to bring to just do one day of shooting. And what they did was they actually said, all right, well, can we still do this? Can we still get the content without having to make Zach go to California and the whole deal? And they actually had me, like John in COVID Cocktails, put a iPhone on a tripod And I just did my little thing. And there was a woman from New York that was the producer that was like watching it on, FaceTime. And we did the whole thing right there just between the two of us. And it turned out to be a pretty cool thing. So I think, it's like making those adjustments. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I think we're going to just get more and more creative as society of how we can actually keep going.
Zach, we have less than a minute. Let Daniel say goodbye.
Totally agree.
Totally.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much for coming on. I want to thank Mr. John Weisbarth, Mr. Zack Giffin, the tiny house experts. We are running out of time, but my name is Daniel Siletti. This has been What's Going On. Thanks so much for joining us, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Daniel.